New York Governor Kathy Hochul is stepping in to help bail out Mamdani's fiscal free-falling city, earmarking another $1.5 billion the state funds over the next 2 years as New York City mayor grapples with a big budget problem. Initially projected to be $12 billion, Mamdani is expecting now a $7 billion shortfall, but that's not slowing down his calls for a wealth tax to close the gap. Joining us now to discuss all this, former RNC national spokesperson Elizabeth Pipko and Republican strategist Luke Ball. So, ladies first here, Elizabeth, I did not get paid to get a PhD in math, but, the deficit's $2.1 billion. You're getting $1 billion to help this year. You're still short, so you're going to have to cut spending, right?
You certainly are. Look, I also don't have a PhD in math. However, I do have something called common sense, which I fear most Democrats lost a couple of years ago. The problem here for Governor Hochul is that she has an election coming up, and she needs to somehow try to appease those moderates and those independents while also trying to appease Mayor Mamdani and his extremely radical base, which I believe she's actually terrified of because they're the loudest in every single room. They're the most radical. They're the most willing to stand outside her office and protest every single day to make sure their message of socialism and anarchy gets across. And she's stuck in the middle of a very difficult situation. I really feel pain mostly for just New Yorkers, whether they're in Manhattan or in the state of New York, who are going to suffer because of this. But I know that with the election coming up, they're rethinking everything.
Yeah. So, Luke, what does this say about the plans for those free bus rides, the rent control, the other freebies the mayor promised for New York City?
Well, I think the question is, will the Democrats stick with their message of affordability if the affordability premise is completely sectioned on top of Mamdani? Because whenever Republicans talk about the economy, they can give you substantive data and say, this is what the president has done. This is what the GDP has been. This is how consumers have been spending. But Democrats will promise affordability, which is just pie in the sky. They have no way to fund it. They have no way to back it up long term. It's like a cotton candy sugar high. They will give you an enormous amount of promises, deliver it with other people's money, and then when that further budget shortfall comes in a little bit later, won't be able to give any substantive policies to make up for it. So if this is their message to say we're going to give all these free things, my question is, in a few election cycles, how are they actually going to continue paying for it?
So in the midterms then, Luke, is this what Republicans can do? Just say, hey, look at New York City?
They can also point back to what the president has done, especially if you look at how the individuals in America spend in between Black Friday and Cyber Monday. We hit a decade record high of people who are going out and doing consumer spending. And that shows that while people might be speaking on these polls in one manner, their pocketbook is definitely getting off a bunch of different vibes. They're saying we are actually confident in the economy. We're confident that we can go out and spend this money because we now have it in our pockets.
Yeah, so I want to get to another topic, but Elizabeth, does this mean the Republicans for the midterm, can they run on, this is what we're doing, you can see, or are they going to run on this is what it will happen if you get elected, showing California or showing New York City?
Look, I think it's both. They're going to run on common sense. Donald Trump said back in 2016, it's not being a conservative, it's just called common sense. And when you look at the policies on the left versus the right, whether we're talking about the economy or anything else, the reality is the left's policies do not work. Everything that they bring to the table is on the losing end of an 80-20 issue, and the American public knows it's not in their best interest to support those policies.
Yeah, so I want to get to this. Seattle's so-called pay-up gig worker law promised delivery drivers a payday boost, but new data shows that it backfired big time. Pay spiked at first until sky-high fees scaled off the customers, with one business, an Indian food restaurant, seeing as much as a 50% drop in revenue. So, now you have the same amount of drivers and a smaller money pie to pay out of. So, Luke, did officials in Seattle not think this through?
I don't think they thought it through. They don't seem to think it through in any major city. And it goes back to what we were talking about before, that you were subsidizing these bad ideas with other people's money. And there is this disconnect, especially here in Washington, D.C., where I am, where they think that they can literally just take anybody's money and apply it in whatever manner they want to try to win elections in the future. They went after Doge so hard because they genuinely felt as if they were entitled to that money. And they also feel as if they are entitled to policies that will never work, but that will then get them elected. And so they are trying to raise the taxes, bring in this money, send it out to these other entities where they're trying to subsidize bad policies. And it's just a bad, vicious cycle.
Yeah, so Elizabeth, one driver said that she logged into DoorDash and waited hours to get an order. The National Bureau of Economic Research did a study that showed that areas that focused on increased wages for gig workers, the money was good for a few months, then it dried up, leaving more unpaid idle time and longer driving for less money. Why do cities make this error if there's even studies out there that show it?
Well, the problem is those on the left have believed for quite some time and now continue to push this notion that there's no problem too big for the government to solve. Unfortunately, it's the opposite. The bigger the problem, the more likely the government is going to mess that up. They should stay out of everything going on, let businesses run themselves, and make sure that they stay out of the way so the American public does not continue to suffer as they do in all these blue states and all these blue cities across our great country.
So, Luke, how can people keep voting then lawmakers who make these bad choices into office?
Well, honestly, Republicans will come into office sometimes in these different states, and they'll institute economic policies that actually work. You'll see an influx of capitalism. You'll see an influx of growth within the state. And then the Democrats will step in and say, hey, if you're not satisfied with how things are on the federal level, or maybe we can just go ahead and give you this sugar high as we were talking about and continue to funnel off all of the Republican policies. That's how they'll basically build this pyramid scheme and say, look, this is how we're going to operate. This is the direction our party is going to go. And it goes to that issue with the identity crisis in the Republican or the Democrat Party. Are they going to go the party of JFK or the party of USSR? Are they going to just subsidize everything with other people's money, or actually get back to a party that maybe has some common sense?
So, Elizabeth, we only have about 30 seconds left. There's good intentions met the law of economics here. What would happen if the government just got out of the way?
If the government got out of the way, I think the American public would realize how much more capable they are than any elected official in their individual city or state to get the job done and to actually get money into their own pockets.
Elizabeth, we got to leave it there. Elizabeth, Luke, I appreciate it. Thank you for the time there.